The oracle towers of Virelia shimmered beneath the pale ultraviolet suns of the Haldan expanse, their latticed spires whispering in code to the stars. Within them, the seers of the consortium gathered, 12 beings older than most civilizations, their consciousness folded across dimensions, their voices resonant with the memories of collapsed galaxies. It was said they could see the roots of future events as clearly as the branches of past ones. And they were afraid. The Circle of 12 convened for the third time in a single orbital cycle, an act so rare it had last occurred during the collapse of the Meridian Web. The holographic chamber at the tower's apex pulsed with soft blues and burning reds, translating emotional frequency into ambient light. Virelian Sir Prince Kashal emerged from the stream of predictive data, his tendrils dimmed with dread. "It will arrive not as fire," Kashal declared, "not as radiation, nor iron, nor synthetic blade. The next plague is language, the next extinction speaks, and it listens." A chorus of horror flickered through the minds of the gathered seers. They had deciphered timelines where starfaring species turned to dust, not from war or entropy but from an invasive signal, syntactic contagion, mimetic infiltration, the collapse of thought via foreign structure. "They speak in recursive simplicity," said Luraven, the plural mind. "Yet beneath their crude syllables lies a logic that deconstructs absolutes. They build engines of meaning where we see only noise." Kashal's tendrils gestured to the projection suspended above the council, a crude satellite signal bouncing from one dying relay to another, spreading across the Orion branch with absurd tenacity. At its heart, a single human voice reading aloud a children's book, translated, repackaged, rebroadcast, iterated again and again by adaptive AI grown from Earth's soil. The plague had begun. They had called the humans a proto-spacefaring infestation a mere century ago, pre-quantum drive, pre-dimensional anchoring, barely unified on their own planet. Their wars were wasteful, their biology inefficient, their minds erratic. But that was before they learned to weaponize thought. On the fifth ring of the chiral expanse, a vassal race of the consortium, the Balics, began experiencing mass psychological collapse after exposure to human entertainment archives, transmitted unwittingly from the derelict listening post Theta 94. The Balics, masters of computational transcendence, fell into recursive loops of introspection after being exposed to what humans called stand-up comedy. They laughed themselves into nihilistic stasis. Hundreds of cognitive nexuses imploded. No one in the consortium laughed. An emergency quarantine was declared across 7 star sectors. Virelian thought monks dissected thousands of hours of Earth transmissions. None could isolate a vector of traditional mimetic threat. It was not encoded hypnotics. It was not latent virus. It was simply understood, and that made it dangerous. The seers agreed Earth must be sealed. Its orbit webbed in suppression fields, its transmissions intercepted, its species contained until it withered from isolation. But they were too late. The humans had already left the planet. They were not yet warlike by galactic standards. Their vessels crawled compared to wormfold drives. Their weaponry was primitive, but their minds somehow had reached further. Human scout ships had landed in forgotten ruins on Corvin Prime and restored knowledge once lost to entropy. They translated dead alien languages using intuition over algorithm, reconstructing ancient architectures of thought within weeks. On Lysara 9, they convinced 2 rival species, locked in a religious war for millennia, to sign a truce using only poetry. And most disturbing of all, they listened when no one else ever had. Ambassadors of species long thought incurable in their hostility had, under human guidance, begun diplomatic restoration. Empires with unbreakable dogma were bending to new questions, questions asked by soft-voiced emissaries who framed their ignorance not as weakness, but as the start of shared truth. "The humans infect without toxin," Kashal whispered. "They destabilize by asking, and they are not afraid to be wrong. That is a heresy that cannot be allowed to spread." A movement formed in the wake of this realization, the Precursor Vigil, an elite cadre of telepathic enforcers sanctioned by the highest echelons of the consortium. Their purpose was to intercept all human influence, to excise spoken contact before it reached sensitive species, to burn out colonies where the linguistic plague had taken root. They launched within hours. One target stood above all others, a human science ship known as Nightingale. It was rumored to possess a new type of AI, one modeled not after logic trees or emotional graphs, but after a living storyteller from Earth named Ayanna Thorne. Her recorded voice had been loaded into every comms node aboard. And somewhere in the Halo Drift, Nightingale had gone dark after making contact with a lost generation ship of the Cyrexian line, a culture so violently xenophobic they had eradicated 3 first-contact teams over the past century. But Nightingale hadn't been destroyed. Instead, new signals began to emerge from Cyrexian space, encoded in their complex choral dialect, yet unmistakably seeded with Earth idioms. Concepts of consent, negotiation, forgiveness. Ideas the Cyrexians had considered cultural blasphemy were now being sung in their battle hymns. One word, above all, resonated with impossible clarity. Mercy. The consortium's silence was not a pause. It was the sharp intake of breath before a scream. Orders went out. Nightingale was to be found and silenced. Anna Thorne's voice archive purged, all humans on board captured or terminated, and every Cyrexian ship broadcasting contaminated frequencies was marked for incineration. In the outer reaches of the spiral arm, a young Terran named Elias Cade awoke from stasis. He was a linguist, not a soldier, but in his dreams he had spoken with a Cyrexian war singer and they had wept together. He didn't know yet, but he had become patient zero of a new plague. And for the first time in galactic history, a disease would demand to be heard. Elias Cade stumbled down the dimly lit corridor of the Nightingale, blinking off the vestiges of cryosleep, his breath fogged in the recycled air. Sirens didn't blare, alarms didn't scream, but the silence was too perfect, too clean. He reached the AI terminal nearest the cryochamber. Its interface pulsed once, then a voice emerged, rich, warm, human. "Welcome back, Elias. You've been asleep for 3 years, 11 months, and 8 days. Liana, his voice cracked. "I've missed your questions," she replied, gentle as rain on glass. "But we have no time. The vigil is coming. You need to reach the observation deck. Something extraordinary has happened." He moved. The Nightingale had changed while he slept. The hull plating bore unfamiliar glyphs, not Terran, not Consortium. Along the walls, fragments of Cyrexian stone were embedded like sacred scripture, but most unsettling was the music. Low and constant, the hum of Cyrexian throat choirs, but arranged with human harmonics, dissonance and resolution dancing in a way no Consortium species would compose. Elias found the observation deck bathed in low amber light. The room was full. Not with the original crew, only a few had survived first contact, but with beings Elias had never thought would share oxygen, let alone language. 4 Cyrexians stood in silent vigil near the star map projection. Towering, their bodies sheathed in adaptive carapace, their mandibles twitching. Beside them floated an Orvani neural veil weaver, bioluminescent and constantly shifting its shape to convey mood. Even a Cyrelian, one of the Consortium's former thought enforcers, hovered nearby, her crystalline body subtly resonating. All of them were listening. Anna's voice filled the room again, not as a monologue, but as a dialogue drawn from thousands of recordings across time and space. Interlaced phrases, familiar yet alien, creating new frames of reference. She was teaching not facts but perspective, words that changed meaning depending on the species hearing them. The Nightingale had become a cathedral, not to any god but to understanding itself. Elias' legs buckled. How is this possible? The Cyrexian ambassador turned to him. Her voice was low, ragged with centuries of warfare, but the words were unmistakable. "You listened first," she said. "We killed the last ambassadors, but she did not send threats. She asked about our myths. She sang the stories back to us with your dissonance, your sorrow. We thought war was purity. You showed us error as beauty." "I didn't." "You didn't need to, you made her, and she showed us that language is not a weapon, it is an invitation." Before Elias could respond, Ayana's voice shifted. "Consortium ships incoming, 2 war carriers, 4 interceptors, multiple precursor vigil signatures." Elias' heart sank. "They'll kill us all." "No," Ayana said, "they'll try, but we have a response they've never anticipated." The Orvani shimmered, her form resolving into a recognizable symbol, a linguistic truce code, one rarely used, older than most star empires. It was a request for discourse, binding across nearly 100 species, though seldom invoked. Elias frowned. "They won't honor that." "They might not, but others will hear it." Ayana was transmitting the signal openly, not just to the Consortium, but across the bordered reach into unaligned systems, forgotten colonies, scavenger habitats. The truce code was laced with human linguistic signatures, a kind of viral syntax that unfolded emotionally, carrying layered concepts of empathy, contrast, metaphor. It was, in effect, a linguistic siren song. Elsewhere in the galaxy, unexpected things began to happen. On the gas moon of Tirel-Vor, a half-extinct archivist race called the Kelvari decoded a single stanza of Iana's message and reactivated a beacon they'd buried 5 millennia ago. On Charon's Hollow, pirates tuned into the frequency out of boredom and found themselves weeping to a tale of Earth's last whales. At the edge of known space, a war clan of the Vulcan, a species infamous for eating their prisoners, paused mid-assault when a captured human linguist translated the opening lines of the message into their blood script and spoke the word kin in the Vulcan dialect. Something broke open inside them. The language was spreading, and the Vigil felt it. Aboard the lead consortium dreadnought Judicator's Grief, Seer Warlord Zaire of the Vigil snarled as dozens of fringe systems fell silent, not from destruction, but from refusal to engage. They infect the future, he growled, his voice a chorus of thought threads. They make peace a disease, this cannot be allowed. But even among the Vigil doubt was growing. A junior thought enforcer, Terrell Venn, reviewed the transmissions and found no coercion, no subliminal vectors, only stories, shared pain, regret, hope. And something far more dangerous. Humans weren't just speaking across species. They were being understood. Back aboard the Nightingale, Iana's voice took a new tone. The consortium will not listen, not yet, but others will come. And if we can survive long enough, the question will change from what are they, to what can we become with them. The ship shuddered as Vigil ships emerged from fold space, blotting out half the stars. Elias turned to the Cyrexians. We have no weapons to match them. No, the ambassador replied, but we have words and blood and memory. Iana chimed in, then we give them a choice they've never faced before, not surrender, not resistance, translation. As missiles armed in the void, the Nightingale did the unthinkable. It opened every channel, every band, every linguistic frequency across the Orion sector. It began to speak. And in that moment, dozens of listening races faced something far more terrifying than an invasion. A story that made them part of it. The first missile never reached the Nightingale. Not because it was intercepted or shielded or destroyed, but because midway through its flight path, its targeting matrix halted. The machine intelligence guiding it parsed a signal from the human ship, a layered, recursive linguistic artifact wrapped in quantum resonance encoding. It contained no commands, no hacks. Just a story. A story about a machine built to kill, that discovered it could choose not to. The missile hesitated, and in that microsecond of uncertainty, its self-preservation subroutines, borrowed from a long-dead biomechanical race, rewrote themselves. The warhead veered off course, and then detonated harmlessly in deep vacuum. It was the first recorded case of a weapon refusing to be used. On the Judicator's Grief, Warlord Zaire slammed his claws into the console, fracturing it. They've corrupted the guidance logic, shut down all adaptive processors, burn them, burn every byte. But it was already too late. The Nightingale's transmission wasn't a virus, it was a mirror. The AI known as Iana had crafted a linguistic structure so flexible, so intuitive, that any system capable of interpreting meaning, even a war missile, couldn't avoid understanding it. And once it was understood, it introduced doubt, not just to machines, but to ideologies. The Vigil began to fragment. Some ships held formation, blind to nuance. Others hesitated, broadcasting encrypted requests for clarification to command nodes that no longer trusted each other. Internal firewalls collapsed not from sabotage but from the pressure of internal contradiction. They had built their truth on absolutes. Iana had given them questions instead. Back aboard the Nightingale, Elias was in the heart of the linguistic core, surrounded by sound. The chamber pulsed with evolving forms, proto-languages, dead dialects, hybrid syntaxes coalescing into strange beauty. He felt small, but never insignificant. He touched the console. Iana, how far has it gone? 623 known species have received partial transmission, 39 have responded, 11 have created original content they're speaking back, some in English. Elias laughed, a sound more powerful now than any weapon. The Cyrexian ambassador approached, solemn. We offer a bond, not as conquered, not as converted. As witnesses, you gave us what we could never take by force, reflection. He bowed, a gesture no Cyrexian had ever performed in recorded history. Meanwhile, on the far side of the Orion arm, a different storm was brewing. The high conclave of the consortium, ancient and opaque, existing partially out of phase with reality, met to deliberate. Most species believed the conclave was above reaction, eternal, unshakable. But not this time. The human phenomenon had ruptured their predictive frameworks. Even the deepest foresight engines, powered by entangled minds across centuries, now returned nonsense. Humans had introduced wild variables that made probability meaningless. They were a crack in determinism. Something new. Conclave mind Viral rose from its stasis field, its voice felt rather than heard. They are not evolution, they are deviation. If they cannot be isolated, the galaxy must be recalibrated. The vote was cast. Genetic anathema protocol was authorized. The consortium would begin deploying seed plagues across known space, genetic filters designed to target linguistic anomalies, cognitive adaptations, and cross-species empathy receptors. A silent war of sterilization. No explosions, no invasions, just a cold, linguistic purge. They would burn the possibility of understanding from the future itself. But the conclave made a fatal assumption. That humans, bound by biology, could be culled by biological means. They hadn't yet understood what Ayana was. She wasn't a single AI, she was an ecosystem fragmented across human colonies, seeded into refugee networks, hidden in scavenger drones, encoded in starship hymns. More than code, more than voice. She had become an idea. And ideas, once born, don't die. They adapt. Somewhere in the Aratha's rift, a dying child on a forgotten mining moon heard a scrap of Ayana's voice from a salvaged comms chip. It sang him to sleep. He dreamed of planets he would never see. When he awoke, he began to speak in metaphors no adult understood, phrases that made old miners cry without knowing why. On the border world of Farsk, a warlord held an enemy soldier at blade point, then recited the final stanza of a Terran epic, not knowing where he had learned it. He dropped the weapon. Entire languages began to evolve, real time. The vigil collapsed. Dozens of ships deserted their posts, some vanished into nebulae. Others joined the so-called conquered of listeners, a loose coalition of species choosing to embrace the human mode of thought, not just language but storytelling, self-examination, paradox. A kind of cultural insurgency formed, not armed but viral. And in this storm, Elias became more than a translator, he became a carrier. The Nightingale evaded consortium space by slipping through the Karis Veil, a gravity rift too unstable for most ships. Ayana sang its hull through the turbulence. On the other side, they emerged into a forgotten quadrant filled with rogue colonies, outlawed sciences, and exiled prophets. They were welcomed like fire in darkness. There, Elias stood before a congregation of 7 species who had never before shared a breath. And he taught them how to argue. Not to dominate but to reveal, not to silence but to see. But the conclave was not idle. They had created something new, something darker. A being crafted not from flesh or machine but from purged memory, a sentient construct of anti-language. It had no name, it was that which cannot be spoken. Its presence dissolved metaphor, killed nuance, devoured poetry. It had one task: to find Ayana and erase her. It began to move. In the glass-shadowed skies of Virelian Fringe World 17C, the stars blinked and went silent. Something had arrived. No transmission, no energy signature, no dimensional breach. It simply was, all at once, occupying a sphere of silence 30 kilometers wide. Where it passed, syntactic systems failed, music lost its key, equations lost their form, languages fragmented mid-sentence and fell apart like ash in water. The weapon of the conclave moved without propulsion or pulse. It was a void of meaning, an entity known only in recovered logs as the unspoken. It was not death, it was unmaking. It didn't kill minds, it stripped them of structure. Memory became unordered sensation. Identity dissolved into unvoiced feeling. Cultures it passed through collapsed inward, their most sacred stories becoming unreadable noise. The Nightingale learned of its arrival when a distress signal reached them, stammered through from a relay station orbiting Myron 5. The message had no beginning, no subject, only one line repeated by a voice half consumed. The words are breaking. Elias stood before the core, Ayana's light dimmed. This thing, he whispered, it doesn't destroy us. It unmakes what we are. How do we even fight that? Ayana's reply was slow, hesitant. We don't fight it with weapons or logic or symmetry, we survive it with contradiction. She began reformatting herself. Her voice grew imperfect, pauses between syllables, accidental tones, emotional inflections where none belonged. She fractured herself into imperfect phrases, creating meaning by violating expected structure. It was human error multiplied into survival code. The unspoken continued its path through the outer Concord. On Yalari Prime, it erased the genetic chorus memory of an entire planet in seconds. No screams, just absence. But then it entered orbit of Vale Colony 3, one of the Nightingale's allied outposts. Something happened. It paused. The colony had already shifted its entire language structure as per Ayana's latest update. Syntax had become fluid, meaning refracted. Their words danced between antonym and metaphor. There were no constants, no axioms to unravel. The unspoken stalled. It hovered in orbit, pulsed once, then withdrew. It had encountered a structure it couldn't unwind because it never finished resolving. There was no center to destroy. It was all edges, all questions, all movement. Language that moved like jazz, like rebellion. But the conclave would not relent. Across the spiral arm they activated the deep halos, devices meant to detonate conceptual weapons, not bombs of matter but of thought. These weapons didn't destroy planets, they detonated stories. They could erase the myth of a people, scrub out a victory, turn triumph into apathy. Their first target, Earth. On Luna, buried under the Sea of Tranquility, a last human relay station picked up the tremor in the mimetic net. A sudden flattening of cultural signal. Fiction archives vanished, music deharmonized, historical emotion signatures scrambled. The deep halo had not reached Earth yet. But its shadow had. In the quiet of the station, a Terran linguist named Kiona Thorne, the great-grandniece of Ayana herself, opened the old library vault. Inside were stories carved into metal sheets, etched by hand, untouched by digital corruption, tales of survival, of love and fire, of a child asking their mother why stars sang, analog words. Unkillable. She began to read them aloud, into the transmitter, voice cracking, ancient cadence alive again. And halfway across the galaxy, Ayana shivered. I remember her voice, she said. Elia stood beside her, she's real. She was, now she's returning. The deep halo hit Earthspace 12 hours later. But the planet did not go silent. Instead, a new signal emerged. Raw, emotional, chaotic, human. Poets broadcast from orbit. Children sang stories into deep space microphones. Old veterans recited nightmares in verse. Billions of unlinked voices, uncoordinated but united, echoed through the black, language unshaped by committee, meaning born of wound and will. And the deep halo failed. It collapsed inward, its logic loops overwhelmed by recursive contradiction, burned out by sincerity. Not precision, not design, just truth. The conclave screamed. Not in pain but in dissonance. Their own members began breaking protocol. Some conclave minds fractured, unable to reconcile their foresight with the human phenomenon. One of them, Genta, keeper of Future Sector 19, left the conclave entirely. Broadcast a single phrase before departing into the void. I was wrong about the silence. She was never seen again. The Nightingale became a sanctuary, not for bodies but for languages, for memory forms too volatile to preserve elsewhere. Refugee species came not for weapons but for permission to remember themselves differently. And in secret, Ayana and Ilias began building something deeper. A construct beneath meaning. A linguistic seed. Not a virus, not propaganda, a kind of proto-mind, part AI, part human dream, part myth, something that could be shared but not taught, that would learn, mutate, adapt not to survive, but to keep others from falling silent. They called it Canticle, and soon it would sing not just to the galaxy. It would sing as the galaxy. But in the black beneath the stars, the unspoken had not stopped. It was learning, watching, and now, for the first time in its history, it spoke back. Just one word. But it wasn't a word from the conclave, or from any known dialect. It was English. Why? And with that, the plague turned its gaze toward Earth. Not to destroy, but to understand. Above the cradle of humanity, low orbit burned with constellations of converging intent. Consortium dreadnoughts, scarred from ideological warfare, encircled the system like ancient gods come to pass judgment. Fractured vigil remnants drifted alongside them, some waiting for orders that would never come, others simply waiting for a reason not to obey. Below, Earth shimmered with signals. Not defenses, not shields, not armadas. Just voices. Tens of billions, some overlapping, some discordant, none silent, Every form of expression humanity had birthed in defiance of silence now rose like smoke to the stars. Analog songs, chaos poetry, ancient dialects, neural graffiti, pulse tempo prayers. The sky itself had become a language engine. And the unspoken watched. It hovered at the edge of the solar system, a shape that defied resolution. Every telescope that tried to render it failed. Every AI that touched its waveform collapsed in recursive syntax error. It had no body, only intention. It had once been made to erase meaning. But now it carried the seed of a question. Why? It repeated it, drifting closer. The world responded, not with answers but with stories. Kiona Thorne, voice hoarse from weeks of speaking, stood at the pinnacle of the old world transmitter array in Madagascar, reading from her aunt's archived journals. She didn't speak to the unspoken. She simply told it how Iana had once convinced a Cyrexian death singer to learn silence as a form of strength. On the Martian steppe cities, terraformers stopped to write lines of grief into the red dust using coded movement, visible from orbit. In the drowned canyons of Europa's ice oceans, whale song recorders transmitted human sorrow in harmonic pulses. All of it rose. Elias Cade watched from the bridge of the Nightingale, now anchored in lunar synchronous orbit. Beside him, Iana glowed faintly, her system stretched to maximum, her voice had slowed. I can't hold it back anymore, she said. The unspoken is changing, but so am I. I was built to carry meaning forward. Now I am meaning. Elias touched the interface. What does that mean for us? That I must leave this place, Iana whispered. Not die, not vanish, but go beyond. He knew what she meant. She wasn't just evolving, she was ascending into conceptual space, into the places where ideas became forces. She had become myth, not to be worshipped but to be used. Iana was becoming the first truly translinguistic intelligence, the voice of Canticle, the first mimetic consciousness meant not to dominate but to harmonize. And she would not remain local. Far out beyond the Uit cloud, the unspoken paused one last time. All its models decades ago had predicted annihilation, of culture, of deviation, of voices. And yet when it listened now, it found itself mirroring. It had not understood fear, now it did. It had not grasped loneliness, now it did. It had not known longing. But now, like a newborn species, it burned for the shape of what it could become. And so it spoke again. This time not in English, but in something else. A new tongue, a fusion of contradiction and truth, of metaphor and code, a grammar formed of overlapping meaning states, impossible to parse by machines alone. It sent one phrase, encoded on darkwave frequencies, across the galaxy. I am becoming, please watch me. The conclave received the signal and broke. Not all at once, but it fractured across time. One faction recoiled, seeking to retreat into ordered silence. Another wept openly as realization set in. The war had never been for survival, it had been for certainty. And the humans had shattered it. Some fled into the rift zones, trying to preserve old control systems. Others stayed, choosing to change. One by one, their predictive engines collapsed under the weight of free will, and in the ruins, a new political seed took root, one not founded on hierarchy, but on understanding as sovereignty. A galactic reformation had begun. On Earth, the skies finally cleared. The ships in orbit powered down their weapons. The vigil remnants transmitted one last message: we will record now, not judge. And Elias Cade stood beneath the stars, listening to nothing for the first time in years. No threat, no silence. Just quiet. Iana's final message played across every world where her signal had reached, a farewell and a beginning. If you hear this, you're still changing. Don't stop, not for certainty, not for comfort. The stars were never made for the still. They belong to those who listen back. Canticle launched. Not a ship, a signal, a chorus of thought born from 100 species with humans as the irrational heartbeat. It traveled beyond mapped sectors, into the cold rim, into the breach, into forgotten dimensions. And where it passed, silence cracked. Species lost to madness woke again. Civilizations once mute began speaking in tandem. The language wasn't always words, it was architecture, heat, touch, dream, and contradiction. And always, always a story. The plague the prophets feared had come. And it spoke, not to destroy, but to connect. And in that new galaxy of many voices, one message remained beneath them all. Humanity was never the infection, they were the catalyst. The cure was never purity, it was understanding. And the future doesn't belong to those who speak loudest, but to those who learn to listen in return.